Welcome back to the channel. My name is Brad and this is Supercoach Pro. Today's video we're doing the end of season team review. We've got a lot to speak about. The trade sort of moves I made that were good and the ones that are not so good. And I've got a list of 10 things I just wrote on my little whiteboard next to me of things I've learned going into next season. And it's definitely going to keep me in good stead to finish higher next year. The aim is obviously to get the top 1K. It'd be amazing to win number one prize because if you're not first, you're last. That's probably not the best motto to live by, but it's definitely motivating, that's for sure. So we'll start off with the highs. Round 7, 8, and 9 were probably the highs. If we look into the season ranking, we'll do that first, and then we'll go into the 10 do's and don'ts. So we'll start off here in round 1. You can see, I'll just expand my screen. I was 3-8, 6-9 overall. I didn't trade the first week. Then I did 2 trades and I got rid of Danger and Rao for Walsh and Mills, which was probably a tick up until around 18, 19, whenever Mills had that mishap with the rugby game, followed by his injury. So what I've learned from this move is, first of all, make sure you have a trade or two in the finals for Supercoach, because that's when your rankings start to slip. And second of all, if there is a slight hint of any coach like Horse or anyone's, saying that a player is carrying an injury and you missed it, maybe go back and listen to some of these teams' press conferences before bringing in a player. Taranto out was a little bit trigger happy. Could have held on to him till probably around 13, 14, whenever he started declining. I bring in Tex to do a job for me, and he did, but I sold him at the wrong price. So this is sort of a wasted trade, I'd say, whereas the trade before was probably a win-win. It's really hard to know, though, because Mills, I was getting Bianco's score, so maybe it wasn't a win for Mills. So maybe at this point of the stage, it's a little bit one win, one draw, and one loss in terms of trades. Clark, upgrade to Bose, was handy at the time. Then Bose didn't finish off so well. I think he got injured not long after. Bring him in at round 4. And this is the thing I learned is don't bring in players that don't have the history behind them for scoring potential. Sort of see how they do in the later rounds and then pick them up. Don't go so trigger happy after 3 rounds of footy. This is one of the other problems that we'll talk about. My number one issue is not starting an R2 or R3 that are cheap next year. This is why it hurt me. It burnt me a lot of trades. So got rid of Meek, had to bring in Hickey, who got over the line, but once he'd had that PCL injury, he sort of never had that form again that he was carrying at the start of the season. So it's a good pickup from round 5, but not having an R2 like Maxi Gorn really hurt me. I know a lot of people didn't rate Max Gorn's year this year, but he was certainly better than anyone else as an R3, unless you had Darcy or Nat Nui or someone like that he was sort of a pod option. Got rid of Caleb Daniel. This was a wasted pick. Trigger happy again after a month of footy. There's no point doing that. I burnt a trade, and this is perhaps a trade I could have used to trade Mills to Daniel Rich or somebody like that. Berry and Campbell at the time was good moves to get rid of to make some cash generation. McRae wasn't the best option for a trade-in, considering I didn't really use him all year for any scores, and he didn't score well until the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season. McCready, however you say it, didn't do much for me either, so that was just a cash grab there. Dunkley out and Highmore out. This was the one that hurt me the most. I wish I had held on to Highmore. I guess the summary out of this is hold your rookies that score well, even if they are a D7 and played at D6 role when needed. It's better to have cover than to grab a player that scores you 30 all season like Bianco. Brayshaw was a great pick. 479 was a steal for his output over the season. Trelaw this is another story. This is where you don't pick injury players and try to get them to play the rest of the 15, 16 games remaining of the season. Stupid move. So there's one, don't bring in injury players, injury-prone players, especially if you've already got players like Josh Kelly in your side. Not too much more to say in the rookie terms. I had to make money. This is probably the best trade of my season. Poulter was scoring really nicely. I went a week early on Poulter, used him for the buys, and used Aaron Hall as an absolute goat. Aaron Hall, bring him in round 8 and round 7 Brayshaw. So if I have a look at Brayshaw from round 7 onwards and what he did bring me, was, in my opinion, was pretty solid scoring. I don't know if the round 7 starts from here or there, technically, as into when I traded him exactly. But if you look at since round 7, 121, 70, 126, 81, 120, 92, 110, 135, a couple 90s in there, the big 190, and 93, 112. So he certainly averaged really nice in those, 3 quarters of the season. Didn't play last week, which hurt my overall ranking. But Brayshaw at 603, I will not start him next season. That's a definite no for me. Now, going back into the team, I guess if you have a look at Hickey's score from round 5, Walsh and Mills, this is interesting. Round 5 is when I bought Hickey in, and he was okay. So 110, 102, 118, that was really serviceable. 84, 136, 96, injured in round 14, did a PCL apparently, and then played the rest of the season and just sort of limped over the line. A lot of 80s in there and a lot of low 100s. Finished off the season nicely though against the goal, a ruckman of Zach Smith, so not a bad score against a nobody ruckman, to be honest. But Hickey is probably a pass, considering I didn't have to use another trade. I just went Meek to Hickey. But definitely lost a lot of points for using that over a Max Gorn type, who I couldn't afford anyway. And the other players, Walsh was probably a steal at round 2 for the Danger and Rao pick. His scores really sum it up. Like, he's got a lot of good scores since having him in. I mean, if you sort by this, he gave me that 193. I had him in there, obviously, in the 158. So if you bought him in the back end of the season, he really did you well. Like, his top scores are around 15, 16, 25, 17, and 18. So finished really strong. Probably a player you would look at in next season. He's only 21, I believe. So he's a guy that was really good for me, for sure. Rory Laird is a player I will start next year, unless I hear some news about Crouch that sort of turns me off the Laird pick. But I think Crouch winning the ball and handballing it out to him will only help Laird. I think Laird's 27 so 28 in December. So it's probably the borderline you'd want to pick for a midfield player. Probably won't have the DPP you wouldn't think. But looking at his scoring, he was so consistent. His worst score was a 75, and he got a couple 90s in there. But his ceiling is high, so 178 from him is fantastic. Now back into this again. Dawkins and Zorko in. Zorko was a brilliant pickup for the price at the time. Went on a really hot streak, had him for the hot streak, and then flipped him out over the buyers. We'll go into that. Trade out Walker for 419, so only made 121k roughly. Dow out was a waste of a rookie. Probably should have held him. Would have been handy for the latter part of the season. Bowes and Powell, this is the never again. Bowes, don't pick a player that's got soft tissue injuries. Dustin Martin was durable, went with the crowd. Should have probably went with a pod forward, but I really couldn't think of one at the time. And it burnt me. Traw out, so he only played 5-6 weeks of football, but in hindsight, he gave me steal, which is a win, but also a loss at the same time. So I don't know how I feel about that. Obviously, Steele was a great pickup for the season, and I'll be starting him next year, no doubt. Flynn and Warner outs was what I needed at the time to bring in, and Chapman, to bring in Oliver, Bianco, Jones. None of them paid off. Oliver didn't have the season he had in the first half. So that was an all-three fail to me, and it's a little bit of a shock calling Oliver a fail, but for me, he did nothing. I mean, I brought him in at a time of round 12, and if you look at round 12 scores for Clary, it's not great. Sorry, it's done this again. So we'll go from round 12 onwards. 94, 108, 105, 87, 118. 3 good scores here, then gives me 98, 93, and 159. So he gave me 4 good scores and then a whole heap of average scores. So not happy about that pick. I probably should start him next year, but I don't think I will at this stage. Probably really harsh. Jaden Short is one I'm considering next year. I know I've been a little bit hot and cold about this pick. He does got a lot of average games in him. If you can find that consistency, he's probably at not a bad price. It will be more the factor as does Waston take kickouts. That's what hurts his scoring potential. And does Bolter start taking kickouts because he's a big kick. So as a Tiger supporter, I'll be looking at that over the preseason. Who takes the kick out? Did I chip it to Short for then Short to run to sort of kick it to wing? Or what did I do with him exactly, structure-wise? Whitfield, I am not going to start any Giants players like a lot of YouTubers and like a lot of people in general have been saying in Supercoach. Do not have Giants players. Simple as that. Now back to this. Round 13, shouldn't have got rid of Zorko. Didn't hurt me at the time because he scored a little bit down. Had a lot of 70s in his score after the round 13 if you go look at his scores. Green, Duncan, Whitfield. I'd say these are all fails. There's not too much to talk about. I mean, Green suspended durability, has a lot of issues. He's on a never again list. Same as Whitfield. He doesn't have the suspension in him, but he's soft as butter, this kid. It's probably a bit harsh to say, but he's sort of, they give him the ball in hospital situations, what they call handball hospital, where he's just lined up by an opposition player. He finds himself on the receiving end and just cops it. It's not his awareness, I don't think. I just think it's players freaking out and selling him into trouble. I see that a lot in Whitfield's game. Bramble was a good player for a steal in this section here with Newcomb and Hawkins. That was probably one of the best trade-in rounds. Didn't do anything too wrong with these guys. Duncan out for Penderbury. Seemed nice at the time, but then Penders get injured, so not great. This is my killer. So if I'm going to state anything, round 16 is what hurt me the most. Impey for Norton. So what round was that? Round 16, right? So this is a pick I've been wanting to justify for a long time since bringing him in, to be honest. On paper, if you're looking at this bloke, right, and 15 rounds are gone, right, and you can see 64, 112, 95, 110, a month of 70s, 98, 90, 76, 81. Injury game, 17, 108. You're thinking, absolute bargain. This guy has been scoring 70, 80, 90s. Got an easy fixture coming up. He's got North. He's got Gold Coast. Not going to have a great day with Melbourne. But then he's got Adelaide. He's got Essendon, Hawthorn, and Port Adelaide. I'm thinking, all right. In reality, I'm thinking he's probably going to turn up in these 2 games. Probably going to have a 60, 70 game year. Probably going to turn up here. Probably turn up here. Probably turn up here and probably have a 70, 80 game here. In what reality I was living in was completely different. He only turned up 3 times for the year and did me nothing. So, never again list is key forwards unless your name is Tom Hawkins. Martin out for Guthrie was probably the only good trade that I loved, to be honest. Guthrie for those last 4 weeks. Sorry, I go to sort this out. Look, 147, 99, 133, 115. That is perfect trading. So don't bring in injury players. I just needed to get a month of football into him. Had Bramble as cover, so I had to take a punt on somebody, and he did the job. And if we have a look at the team as a whole, Laird was very serviceable. Mills is probably one of the factors that hurt my rankings. So for that note, I know it's a little bit personal. I won't be starting Mills next year, especially an ankle injury, Achilles, and whatever else. I know it's the same thing, but I don't think I'll be looking at him next year. He's just burnt me, and a lot of teams will bring him in as a midfielder for this price next year, but I just can't do it to myself. He's probably the reason why I slipped out of the rankings. Just on that, before we do get stuck into the actual side, look, the rankings were pretty nice, to be honest. Like, round 1 and 2, you're in the 3,000, you're thinking you're thereabouts. Then you crack the ton in round 3, 4, you stay there, you're thinking, yeah, brilliant, 2 weeks of this. You go back out for a poor score of 2,087, you kind of expect that. But early on, if you can get that 2-2, 2-3, you really jump the boat. So you need to have a good starting side, is what I'm trying to say. And the consistency is sort of what brought my form into it. 7, 8, 9, like, they're not big scores in terms of reality in the back end of the season where you're looking at 2 5s, but they're just consistent. 2, 2, 7, 9 is somehow around 19th for the weekly rankings, 429 overall. Then you go to 339, score okay, and then bang, you're out of there within a week, back in for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, right? And this is where the slide happens. So if we're finding out where it happened, it's this. It's the Impey to Norton. It's not the Martin to Guthrie. It's not the Penderbury to Marshall, which I totally forgot about. It's the not having trades to fix my back line, to fix the Tom Stewart problem, to fix all that issue in general. So, excuse me, Callum Mills is a no-go for me. Yeah, it's a real interesting one. Some of these players might not be on your list because you've held them all year, but teams will look into them next year, and if you've had them, you sort of get a better idea. You don't just go, oh, the name looks good, the price looks good. You want to see why they did good, why they did bad. You want to question those little scores. Why are they cheaper than the other players around them? Is it just an injury-affected game, or is it just their consistency of their back half or first half of the season? Like, Oliver on paper next year, people that have Oliver won't see the back half of the season because they go, oh, wow, he's such a good pick. He's 24, 25 years old. Let's pick him up. Whitfield is a no-go. He's got the potential to score well, but he'll just miss games. Very Zach Williams-like. Ridley is a very interesting prospect for this price. I'll probably be sucked in the preseason if he scores 150 and 160. Does the retirement of Hooker help his scoring potential? Maybe. He's at a really nice price though, so that is a very tempting pick for me. I'd actually prefer Ridley over Short because he has the game to intercept, take contested marks, kick-outs, all that. And if Heppel isn't playing in the back line next year, he's tempting. But when Heppel's there, that's when he loses his points with Valverde and whoever does kick-outs there as well. So, 460, not a bad price. Bianco won't even touch for a rookie next year. Stewart, depending on his preseason build-up next year, I think he's a great pick-up. He's not a guy that will really hurt you on the flip side. Like, he's got that one big game of 152, but it's just his consistency between that 100 and 130 mark. It's more that 115 mark that he delivers each and every week. Underscaled as a player, but I love the pick. Jack Steele's a lock for me. Straight up, Jack Steele, McRae, and Took Miller are probably the three I want next year and will have. The rest are a bit not too sure at this stage. His consistency is what I love. I mean, separate by scores, and he's got 5 150s in him. He's got 3 140s and only 3 90s. So he is the man. I didn't rate this pick at the start of the year, and I feel stupid because in the early rounds I'm like, nah, why would you want Jack Steele? And it was his last half where it came through, so it's the reverse of Oliver. I mean, he's got the 150 there, he goes 104, 105, 91, 110, 116, 99. I'm not really tempted, but I'm like, 563. He could be something. He only had these real 2 good games and brought him in just off pure luck, instinct maybe, call it what you want, but it was just timing was perfect. And he's a guy I will pay up for. So the first thing I want to speak about is not trading too early. So first month of football, I won't be trading unless it's an 8 to 12 week injury or something stupid on ACL, then yeah, I will. Then I've got on my noteboard here, not bringing in enough DPP players. That's the thing I've really learnt this year is not having that flexibility to move my players in and out of the side where needed is something that really hurt me. Too many injury-prone players is something else too. Like, why did I start Josh Kelly? I knew he was going to miss a game here or there. Impey knew he had the injury history. Zeeble knew he had the injury history. Played every game bar one. So I think it was more buying in those players during the middle of the season and having an injury-prone side. There we go. So now you got Trelaw there, Kelly there, Hickey there, who is coming off 1 week most games. And sometimes not by choice, it's by price. They look like a good price. They're a good steal. They've had a bad game. They've got injured or something, and you bring them in, and then before you know it, you've got too many injury players there. McRae, you just got to start, don't you? He's brilliant. He's consistent. He doesn't have the ceiling as some of these other guys we talk about. His ceiling's not quite there. As a 170 bloke, he's got a lot of 140s. Got 5 there, but Steele's got better scoring potential. Oliver has the highest ceiling at 204, which he's done against Adelaide multiple times. Brayshaw, 190 against Tigers who don't tag, which Tigers probably need to have a tagger. Maybe Jack Graham does a tagging role, but it's just not in Richmond's coaching structure. They back their system like a lot of teams will say, but I prefer teams that actually use a tagger because I think it nullifies a good player. I think taggers are something that teams should look into next year a little bit heavier because it does help your side get across the line. If Mitchell's getting 50 on you, yeah, you can say they're not good touches, but he's given the ball to other players who belted into the forward line. If Hawthorn had a decent forward line, or if he was at a decent club, he'd be a great player. I think he's very underrated. So taggers should be a thing. It hurts our Supercoach teams, but it's also something we should be aware of. Like next year, Lachie Ash is in the Giants. If the Giants are playing Essendon, then Merritt or Parrish aren't safe for a VC or a C. So that's another thing we probably don't look into is taggers. Taggers are a big thing that we should probably look into. If a side has a tagger that's a good tagger, like Banfield did a job on Steele today in the first half, keep in mind that, Freo will use a tagger for whoever you want to VC or C. The weather is a factor too. I somehow, after a month of footy, I captained Ridley in that 31 game in the wet, and it really hurt me because he scored 62 points. I only captained him because he had a 125, 136, 147, 124. Had no idea the Gabba in round 5 would be an absolute tsunami. And yeah, he got kicked ass. So, weather. If they're a contested player in the wet, you probably want a Jack Steele to be a C because he's a tackling player. If you want a clean game under Marvel, under the roof, you probably want a Josh Kelly. So weather is a factor. Sometimes I've been looking at the weather for players and going, all right, what's the weather like in such a suburb that they're playing at? But also, if it's a windy game in Ballarat, do you really want to have the Bonds as your captain? Things like that can really determine how your captain option goes for the week. Trading early is probably the biggest one that's, I think, hurt most coaches this year. Trading players during the buys for extra points is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done in Supercoach. I traded multiple players like Zorko that I shouldn't have just to get 30, 40 points. But then in the remaining, Zorko's going to get that score back. I know he missed 2 weeks and that was why I got rid of him. But he gets a 170. He's already made up for that one bad 0 and the other bad donut players scoring 2 170s in a row. He's got 340 points over, a month's worth of games. And he's got DPP. So why I did that, I have no idea. Brain fade for sure. What else can we talk about? Not picking key forwards is probably the one. Apart from Hawkins is the only exception. Sorry, Sean, I'm just in the middle of my video. I do apologise if you can see that in the top right hand corner. That's quite funny. Toby Green, 89. Just throwing me off what I was thinking about. Players like Toby Green, I guess, is what I'm thinking of is you know what you're going to get from him. You know he's never going to be that 110 player. So if he's been that player and he's, 27, 28 and he's never really had a season more than a ton, he's probably never going to get there. It's very rare that these players are late bloomers and really good finishers off in the back of the year, apart from someone like a Hickey, fourth club, somehow has, one of his best seasons ever. But not picking in key forwards is one. I thought Norton would be my pod. He'd be a great pick. He'd got a great fixture. I think we get sucked into fixtures a lot, and that was a stupid move. Fixtures something you should look at in the back of the season, but it's probably more their scoring history against the teams that they're playing is another factor that we probably don't look into too much. We probably should. If they've got the last 3 at 130 against West Coast, just make him your VC. Take that punt. And on the flip side, if they're in form but they've never scored well against Fremantle, like Steele, never scored well against Fremantle in the last 3 games, 87, 85 and something else. But his form said otherwise. His form said, mate, pick me. He had a horrible against for Freo, but his form was just too good. So I think you see form players and VC history players is what I've learnt. And the Ruckman situation is probably the big one. You probably just start off with a Sean Darcy, Natanui, Gawn, maybe not Grundy, but he's at a good price. Does he feel like a new Grundy next year with the new coach, whatever happens there? Have a look at the preseason. Does he look interested? Does he not? But definitely don't use a cheap R2, R3. Didn't use my gut, I've written, on my little whiteboard here. I didn't use my gut, and I don't know why I didn't use my gut instinct. I think it's just because I got worried about some of these players, and I last minute changed them. Most of them were by accident, to be honest. I was looking at their scores and just clicked the wrong button at work. I did that with Walsh. And other times I was like, I feel bad for the channel, but I'm just doing a last minute thing because someone's away out in the midfield and I think they're going to grab the ball more. So it never really worked out for me is changing my pick last minute. Like today I was thinking, I'll go Laird last minute instead of Steele. That was one that would have paid off. But generally speaking, they don't. So that is basically what I've learned, the top 10 things. I'll go through the players. Will I start them or will I not next year? Obviously, a lot can change in 6 months of footy. Laird for me is a tick. Mills for me is a no. Short is a maybe. Whitfield a no. Ridley is probably a tick. Bianco no. Stewart yes. Jones no. Steele and McRae yes. Oliver no. Brayshaw no. Merritt no. Walsh, that's a maybe. He's good price. He's a kid. Worried about his, how he copes with the tag. Guthrie, no. He was serviceable. But Kelly, definitely not either. I know he's just a fantastic price, but he's going to miss games. And I don't like soft players. I got too many of them this year. Finished with a lot of soft players. Whitfield, you got Mills, who I think is a bit soft. You got Brayshaw, who's a soft player. Kelly, who's a soft player. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm using that term. Now, when these guys cop injuries, they sook about it. They look like they've been shot. Whereas you look at players like Steele, they get banged up. Even Oliver gets banged up, sucks up the big ones, plays for the free kick, and plays out the game. So there's tough players, and then there's soft players. So I'm not going to be picking soft or players that are just injury prone next year. I forgot where I was up to. Pretty sure I was up to here. I've already said no to these guys. Grundy a maybe. Hickey a definitely no. Hall, yes. I mean, in the back line, start with him. If you have to trade him out by round 4 because he's done an angle, then so be it. But he was probably the trade of the year for me. I bought him in for such a fantastic price. I think it was, where are we? 415k. 113, 112, 104, 121, 141, 173, 118, 116, 110, 124, 128, 116, 127, and 139. Huge. Even with an injury-affected game and a sub-game, he's averaged 103 for the season. He's a gotta be. Marshall is a definite for me as well. I can't tell you how much I love seeing this player play games, and if you're a St Kilda fan, you just love him at your club. This is through no fault of his own with his injury-affected games, but the consistency next year he's a player that can average 110. See how Ryder pulls up next year. If he's retired, mate, you were picking Marshall in the ruck, even. Hopefully he keeps his DPP, though, and have a swing. That's something I'll look at next year, is having a DPP swing for a Marshall type in there. So if I need to cover a Grundy or Nat Nui or Sean Darcy or someone that's of that calibre, you can do that with a Marshall. That's something I'll be looking at in the preseason. A defensive midfielder and a midfielder switch, and I want a forward midfielder switch. I don't want it to compromise my side, but I definitely want it to help my side be flexible without having to trade players out. Hawkins is a player I will consider. I know he's the older sort of player, but he has a lot of ruck contests in him. He's been a great pickup since bringing him in. I know he did this for me, but after that, 108, 70, 128, 112, 77, 86, 109, 100. He's a player I like, unless Jezza sort of looks like the man next year, but Jezza's made out of plastic. I'd prefer Hawkins because he takes those ruck hit-outs and is a pretty durable player. And yeah, none of these players I'll be considering. Maybe Zeeble. He's at a good price now at 485. Didn't know he'd make throughout most of the season, apart from last week around, which is fine because Hall went bananas when he wasn't there. So didn't finish off the season too well, but probably a guy you look at. And I totally forgot, by the way, if you are still watching this, that it always is locked. It's always like this at the end of the season. I totally forgot that when I did my video. In terms of players, rankings, I know I got the top 3 players. I got McRae, Steele, and Oliver in total points, but Oliver didn't do it for me in the back end of the season, so I don't think I got all those good points in there. Gordon 4, Bont 5. Bont's super cheap next year. Out of these guys, I'm definitely taking these 2, not taking Oliver. I'll probably take Max Gawn, even though the other ruckman in Melbourne, I've gone blank. We're sharing that mantle 50-50. I still like Gawn as a player. Has so much upside still. Can go forward, kick goals. And hopefully Melbourne win the premiership this year. Bontempelli, yeah, look, I like the price. I'm very tempted for him next year. Took, yes. Lyons, probably not so much next year. Been a great pickup if you had him. Mitchell, no. Rory Laird, yes. Walsh, maybe. I did that backwards. Nat Nui, probably not. Zach Merritt and Darcy Parish. Parish, maybe. I know he had it faded off in the back end of the year. Sean Darcy is possible, but I don't like paying up for players. That's one good thing I did is I didn't start off with Neil, didn't start off with Jake Lloyd, didn't start off with Gawn for the price. So the one good thing I didn't do this year was didn't buy players over 650 range. Surprising that Parker's in that top section there. Grundy, Guthrie, Kelly, and it just keeps going. We'll have a look at some cheap players in the future over the next couple of weeks to see which players will be in that top of the list for potential players, potential rookies, potential clubs that players that switch to other clubs. Who looks good in that sense? And I think the next thing I want to speak about before we end the video is don't spend too much money on particular players that you don't think will continue that form. And like Laird might be a great price and a great player, but he's 28 next year. Is that the peak of his powers? How old are these players that you're having in your side? Next year I want them to be that mid-20s. I don't want them to be too young because they don't have that consistency. But I don't want them to be too old where they're off the cliff and their best was last season or the last season before that, and we're hoping they rebound. And I won't be picking players that have had injury-affected seasons. I want a player that's had a good preseason and a player that has shown 2 or 3 seasons of consistency before I even look at them. Anyway, I think I went on long enough for my season review. There's not too much more I can think about to talk about. It'd be just wasting your time. So that's the end of my season review. Not sure if I did the structure too well, but if you hang in there and you want to see some content over preseason, give me some suggestions. Look, any suggestions you put there, I'll actually do a video about them. So whatever you name, I'll do the video. I'll do some research, and we'll talk about top 10, whatever you want to see next year, or this year. Top 10 rookies for next year. I don't know, top 10 bargain players in the forward line, top 10 bargain midfielders, whatever you want, we'll do it, and we'll keep this channel going throughout the year, so you've got something to look forward to for Supercoach-wise. Hopefully you guys won your grand final, and I will catch you in the next video, maybe in the next week or so, depending what I can come up with. And hopefully I can team up with some Supercoaches in the preseason. I'd love to team up with someone like DR or something like that. That'd be an absolute goal of mine. Anyway, catch you on the next one at some point this season for sure. Catch you.